Welcome to Module 4, Forgiveness. This segment is likened to the military's naval seal in my estimation, because it requires so much technique and so much practical applications that everyone's not going to be able to do it. So we have to come into the forgiveness segment knowing that this is not something that everyone's going to be able to participate. And quite frankly, people won't choose to participate in this segment called forgiveness. Forgiveness means that you are going to have to be heavy on the maturity and heavy on the maturity. And unfortunately, those are characteristics that are not developed in every human being. So when we're upset and when we're wondering why people won't forgive, we have to remember that forgiveness is the elite. It's for the elite. It's the Navy SEAL. Like when we think about war and strategy and the Army and the military forces, this segment is for those who are as skilled as the Navy SEAL. Because you have to have the grit, you have to have the perseverance, you have to have the desire to stay in the fight. Because everything in you at times will go against the actions of forgiveness. It's counterintuitive because we want to stay in a bad mood, we want to get revenge. But when we're moving in forgiveness, it requires that we pull from something greater than ourselves and within ourselves. And for those of you who are spiritual, that would be your God experience. And for those of you who are not spiritual, it would just be what you may have seen, experienced, and just a very difficult endeavor, but a very possible endeavor. This segment, we're going to start out with understanding, like I stated, that hands down, it's the most difficult aspect. So you're going to have a lot of patience in dealing with people and with teaching people about forgiveness. And you have to check your forgiveness and your model of forgiveness, because it's easy to get exasperated and to side and agree with people when you're teaching about forgiveness or when you are mediating forgiveness. It's just you have to stay aware of your transference, stay aware of what you're feeling, and if it triggers emotions from you, and quite frankly, it will. So it's an opportunity for you to develop as well. And we know that forgiveness is difficult and it's not always easy. And even, after we have decided, we have to continue to decide and continue to decide that forgiveness is going to be our action of choice. Forgiveness expresses the epitome of who God is, because it encompasses mercy, kindness, thoughtfulness, sacrificial love, and so much more. Forgiveness is an illustration of character. It announces your cognition on who you are and, your expectations and your abilities, because forgiveness is a declaration that I'm not perfect. And neither indeed do I expect other people to be perfect. But in the midst of pain, because that's in our amygdala, we lose sight of all of the rationale on why I should forgive and why human beings make mistakes, because we become trapped and locked into our amygdala and our emotions. So we remember the Brown family. They had a lot of unforgiveness. And I think the biggest model or the biggest example of the unforgiveness was the divorce between Susie's parents. Divorce is an assault against forgiveness. And sometimes you cannot be reconciled due to violence, due to marital affairs. But it sends a loud message to the family members that sometimes forgiveness is not possible, or how you forgive. Because even if there is a disruption in the marital union, there can be an amicable way to forgive, maybe not be reconciled, but to have the right spirit. So we're going to talk about forgiveness, because forgiveness in totality is the debt cancellation. You're not looking for revenge. You have decided to exchange your stress and your vengeance and to give it over to God if you are a religious person, or even if you are a person who just believes that what goes around comes around. You just give the scenario to the system, and you take the system out of you and you give it to the system, and you just give up your right to revenge. And so it is difficult because in our human nature we want to seek revenge, but forgiveness says I'm no longer going to try to collect from you or make you be punished for what you've done to me. And again, it is a declaration that you understand that you're not perfect and that there is no moral superiority in you, and that at some point you have hurt someone and that you will hurt someone. And so again, back to the Brown family, it's looking at how they learned forgiveness, how Susie and her family learned forgiveness because of the divorce of her parents. There's also disharmony and unforgiveness between some of her siblings against the parents. So it becomes a model and a pattern of how people forgive, because children, like in every circumstance, they learn how to forgive and they learn how to love from their parents. We learn from our home of origin. So in Susie's experience and her siblings' experience and probably her parents' experiences, they did not fully get an understanding of how to operate in forgiveness. And so many times that happens. And I'm using the Brown family as an example because this is our running vignette. But even in your family, it's important that you look at, how has forgiveness been modeled? How has it been modeled in your family? Have you been able to see that people are forgiving? Have you noticed that people hold grudges? It's a multi-generational experience with forgiveness, because if you don't see it, then you don't know what to expect, and it becomes the common practices of the family. So going back and looking at your genograms that we talked about and looking at multi-level generational patterns of forgiveness, and how did they disengage? Was there, a cutoff? Was there estrangement? Because generationally, if there's estrangement, people will walk in that pattern and they won't practice forgiveness, because forgiveness is not a part of the model of family and unification. So it's important that you even question, how did I learn about forgiveness? What do I know about forgiveness? We know there's the practical word of God that teaches forgiveness, but sometimes people say, well, I'm not God. But there's many references about forgiveness throughout the Bible dealing with humanity, and we're going to tackle that later on in our modules. But today we're looking at the unforgiveness and its impact, and how to help people who are willing, because you have to be willing to walk in forgiveness. And I think it's important that we talk about the consequences of not forgiving one another and not being a forgiving person, because that can be a motivation, and it also can be an instrumental tool when you're working with families, when you're working with your congregations, or when you're working with yourself, so that you can begin to have that dialogue and bring awareness to what unforgiveness is actually doing to you and others, because we're interconnected. Remember, we talked about the law of quantum physics. And so every particle is affected by the other particle. No man is an island. So when I'm in unforgiveness, I'm impacted, but everyone else around me is also impacted. It's not an individual affair. All right. So the interesting thing is that science has declared unforgiveness to be a disease in the medical books, and they're finding more and more studies and more information about the ramifications of unforgiveness. There was a Howard University study that said 61% of men and 59% of women of those who are difficult to treat with cancer were traced to have unforgiveness. So unforgiveness is really prominent among those who have cancer, because we were not made in the way God made us. We were made in love. So we weren't made to be angry, to be resentful, to relive experiences, and to put our bodies in re-injury and constant trauma through the process of unforgiveness. And I think that is something to remember, because you're going to see families who have unforgiveness, and you may have unforgiveness. And then I want you to look at what's their health like, because it impairs the health. If nothing else, this could be a motivation for you to admonish and to encourage family members to look at resolving the issues, because they feel like, if I just cut you off, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm healthy. The internet is saying cut off toxic stress, but you can't cut off the toxic stress and unforgiveness and still hold on to it, because unforgiveness makes you hold on to the event and to the negative emotions. So we're looking at it and how even in the Brown families, there is a lot of enmeshment sometimes with unforgiveness. There's group unforgiveness, like the family experiences pain together. So if one person is injured, then everyone is injured. So that's like the experience is shared and the emotion is shared. And although we love each other, we have to be careful that how we deal with that. And I get it, because you love your loved ones and you don't want to see them hurt, and you can have an opinion about what happened. But as far as it goes with the unforgiveness, you have to decide, like, am I going to be plagued by what other people did, and what cousins did to each other, what grandparents did, or what someone did to my sibling? And it's not to say that you're disloyal. It's just deciding that I can forgive and still love both parties. And it doesn't mean I'm in relationship with. It's just that I want to keep myself healthy, and I don't want to be someone who eventually becomes sick or impacts my other relationships because of this enmeshed unforgiveness. So you get to decide. You get to be an individual in how you handle the offense and how you handle the process of forgiveness. You can love both sides. And I know it gets tricky because people want you to model their style of unforgiveness, but you get to decide. I say that's one of the key components in dealing with families, is helping them to know respectfully, how do you walk and share love, but not share offense in that way, because you may have a weaker immune system and it may cause you to be sicker than the person who forgives but can go on and can still conduct themselves in a fashion that is functional. So you get to decide, and you have to look at that. You get to ask those questions. And then you get to determine who you want to model. You get to look at, okay, because maybe someone is more forgiving. Maybe someone is a loving person. And maybe you get to decide, like, I'm going to take that approach. I'm still going to be in the family because we talked about enmeshment and individuality and healthy connections. But you get to even say, I want to model how to protest, meaning say that the event was offensive, but I don't want to walk in unforgiveness. I don't want to walk in pain, and I don't want to walk in resentment. So I'm going to model for my family how to be offended, but how to turn it over to God, or how to let them go and let karma take care of it and still protect myself. It's not reconciliation, but it's deciding not to let the ugly and the cancerous emotional turmoil of unforgiveness rest in my body. So you get to decide if you want to be that, and you get to identify the people who just have negative styles of forgiving, and they just kind of want to put that on you, and they want to talk negative about people, and they want to try to seek revenge. And you get to decide how to be in a family and be loving, but not participate in that portion of the unforgiveness cycle. Now, there's three types of forgiveness. When we're looking at forgiveness, there's personal forgiveness, there's interpersonal forgiveness, and there's spiritual forgiveness. And all of these forgivenesses impact how you show up in the family and how you show up in relationship. Personal forgiveness, I'm going to say that one first, because that one goes kind of covert, and we kind of feel like we have a right to privately not forgive ourselves for mistakes and things that we may have done and in our past, and we may have a lot of shame, and we tell ourselves, I could never forgive myself for that. And by harboring that unforgiveness, it's still the same. You can still have the same medical issues and all of those things, and it influences how you engage with other people, because it makes you an unforgiving person. Because